Have you ever wondered why the most incompetent people often end up in positions of power? It's a pattern so consistent throughout history that it can't be coincidence. From infamous leaders to modern CEOs building empires on deception. In this psychological investigation, we're going to reveal what Machiavelli understood 500 years ago, that intelligence can actually be a liability in power games. The skills that make someone competent frequently differ from the traits that help them gain authority. Like a chess game where the rules suddenly change, those who master the hidden dynamics of power often outmaneuver those with traditional talent. What truly matters in leadership might surprise you. The Machiavellian paradox: intelligence as a liability. Contrary to what many of us assume, intelligence might actually hold you back from gaining power. This is one of Machiavelli's most surprising insights, though he never stated it quite so directly. In The Prince, Machiavelli wasn't concerned with morality or intellectual pursuits. He focused entirely on the practical mechanisms of acquiring and maintaining power. And within this framework, certain qualities we associate with high intelligence become surprising liabilities. Think about what intelligence typically brings: nuanced thinking, careful ethical considerations, and awareness of complexity. These qualities make for brilliant philosophers and scientists, but in the raw pursuit of power, they become significant handicap. Someone who sees all sides of an issue might hesitate when decisive action is required. A person who weighs moral implications carefully might miss opportunities that less scrupulous competitors would seize immediately. Machiavelli understood this paradox centuries before modern psychology had a name for it. His concept of virtù, the set of qualities making a leader effective, wasn't about virtue in the moral sense. Instead, it centered on practical efficacy, adaptability, and the willingness to act decisively, even ruthlessly when circumstances demanded it. Someone too intelligent, too caught up in ethical contemplation, might lack this essential quality. The fate of Socrates provides a perfect historical illustration. He was arguably the most brilliant mind of ancient Athens, a man whose intellectual prowess remains legendary. Thousands of years later, yet his relentless questioning and pursuit of truth led not to power, but to a death sentence. His famous admission, "I know that I know nothing," demonstrated remarkable intellectual humility and marked him as politically vulnerable. Meanwhile, throughout history, populist leaders with far simpler messaging have captured the loyalty of masses and risen to extraordinary heights of power. Complex thinking operates like a maze. The more pathways you can see, the longer it takes to choose a route forward. While you're mapping every possible turn, others simply charge ahead. Just as history demonstrates through Socrates' fate, modern research confirms this counterintuitive relationship. A 2017 study published in the Journal of Management discovered that intelligence positively correlates with leadership effectiveness only up to an IQ of approximately. Beyond this threshold, additional intelligence actually becomes a hindrance to leadership emergence. Why? Exceptionally intelligent individuals often struggle to connect with others who cannot follow their complex thinking patterns. You might be right, but you'll be right alone, and leadership fundamentally requires bringing others along with you. This handicap manifests regularly in corporate environments where brilliant analysts remain stuck in middle management, while someone with modest intellectual abilities but strong political instincts rises to the executive suite. The technically brilliant person solves complex problems, while the politically adept person builds alliances, simplifies messages, and positions themselves advantageously. The highly intelligent face specific handicaps in power struggles. Their nuanced thinking prevents them from communicating with the clarity that inspires followers. Ethical considerations slow them down precisely when bold action might be required, and complex communication patterns alienate potential supporters. Intelligence often manifests as sophisticated vocabulary and abstract reasoning. creating distance from audiences who might otherwise support them. Consider organizational settings. The brilliant product designer who cannot explain their vision remains trapped in middle management. Meanwhile, the moderately intelligent manager who masters organizational politics continues climbing the corporate ladder. The designer's intelligence becomes a liability specifically because it prevents adaptation to what the power structure rewards. So what type of intelligence actually helps gain power? It's not raw cognitive horsepower, but rather social and emotional intelligence. The ability to read rooms, understand motivations, simplify complex messages, and act decisively with incomplete information. A leader needs enough intelligence to comprehend complex situations, but not so much that they become paralyzed by awareness of every possible ramification. Intelligence can prevent you from gaining power because the very skills that make someone intellectually capable, nuanced thinking, appreciation of complexity, ethical reasoning, become liabilities in power struggles where simplicity and bold action prevail. The person who sees 3 steps ahead hesitates while their less prescient competitor has already captured the advantage. The confidence solution: how overconfidence beats expertise. That hesitation of the intelligent leader creates a vacuum, one that overconfident individuals are all too happy to fill. What's truly fascinating is how the limitations of less capable people actually give them a competitive advantage in gaining power. Our brains have evolved with a glitch that consistently mistakes certainty for competence, creating a psychological blind spot that's been exploited throughout history by those who need it most. This cognitive bias has a name: the Dunning-Kruger effect. First identified in the 1990s by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger, it reveals a disturbing inverse relationship between skill and self-assessment. The less skilled a person is, the more likely they are to dramatically overestimate their abilities. Meanwhile, genuine experts tend to underestimate their competence, fully aware of how much they don't know. In leadership contexts, this creates a perfect storm. The least qualified individuals often project the most confidence, while the most qualified display humility and caution. Our social evaluation systems weren't designed to handle this contradiction. A 2020 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology confirmed what many of us have suspected. Overconfident individuals are significantly more likely to be perceived as leaders by their peers, regardless of their actual competence. This research documented how the appearance of certainty proves more persuasive than demonstrated expertise when groups select leaders. The implications are profound. Our collective decision-making processes contain a fundamental error that repeatedly elevates the wrong people. Consider the historical case of George Armstrong Custer. Despite a series of catastrophic military misjudgments, his extreme confidence propelled him to rapid promotions and cultivated devoted followers. His final disaster at Little Bighorn wasn't enough to erase the power his overconfidence had already secured him. Custer's career trajectory demonstrates how the illusion of competence, fueled by unwavering self-belief, can override critical evaluation of actual skill. This pattern of rewarding confidence over competence spans centuries and contexts. Modern business offers equally compelling examples. Adam Norman, founder of WeWork, secured billions in investment funding despite a fundamentally flawed business model. His charismatic, bold presentation style created an aura of inevitable success that investors found irresistible. The pattern repeats globally. Confidence consistently trumps competence in leadership selection, often with catastrophic results when reality eventually catches up. The mechanism behind this confidence illusion lies in how our brains process social information. When evaluating others, we rely on mental shortcuts. Confidence signals competence, decisiveness, suggests clarity of thought. Overconfidence acts like a dazzling firework display, bright, attention-grabbing, and impressive from a distance. but ultimately hollow when examined closely. Yet, our attention remains fixed on the spectacle rather than the substance. Think about how experts typically communicate. A climate scientist carefully qualifies predictions with probability ranges and acknowledges variables. A charismatic but uninformed personality makes bold, absolute claims. This will happen, guaranteed. Our brains instinctively gravitate towards certainty, even when evidence supports qualified statements. This psychological vulnerability creates a perverse incentive structure. Those who know the least have the least reason to doubt themselves, freeing them to project maximum confidence. Meanwhile, those with genuine expertise recognize complexity and hedge their statements accordingly. Overconfident leaders physically manifest their advantage. They adopt expansive body language, maintain unwavering eye contact, and speak without hesitation. These nonverbal cues trigger deep-seated psychological responses in observers. By contrast, thoughtful experts often pause, qualify statements, and physically express uncertainty, behaviors our primitive brains misinterpret as weakness. For individuals navigating this distorted reality, recognizing the confidence illusion is crucial. When encountering unusually confident leaders, ask, does their certainty match their evidence? Are they acknowledging complexity or oversimplifying? Do they welcome challenges or dismiss them? The most dangerous leaders aren't those who occasionally make mistakes. They're those who never admit the possibility of being wrong. What psychological trick do incompetent leaders use to appear more qualified than they are? They exploit our cognitive bias toward confidence. The less they know, the more certain they can be, creating a paradoxical advantage in leadership selection. Our brains, evolved for a simpler world, consistently fall for this illusion across context, from corporate boardrooms to political campaigns. The Incompetence network, building a fortress of mediocrity. Behind the shield of overconfidence lies an even more insidious strategy that incompetent leaders employ. They methodically construct entire networks of mediocrity around themselves. This isn't merely a quirk of organizational culture. It's a deliberate survival mechanism that Machiavelli recognized centuries ago as fundamental to maintaining power without merit. In The Prince, Machiavelli offered a profound insight that serves as a litmus test for leadership quality. Examine who a leader chooses to surround themselves with. He argued that a ruler's intelligence can be directly measured by observing their inner circle. This observation revealed a strategy that weak leaders have employed throughout history. When incompetent individuals gain power, they deliberately select subordinates who pose no intellectual threat, creating a protective buffer of mediocrity. The mechanism is elegant in its simplicity. Weak leaders intentionally select less competent subordinates to ensure their authority remains unchallenged. Rather than valuing expertise and capability, they prioritize loyalty and non-threatening demeanors. This creates a hierarchical structure where questioning authority becomes taboo, and raising concerns gets interpreted as lacking team spirit. The result is an entire ecosystem designed to protect and perpetuate incompetence. Emperor Commodus exemplifies this phenomena. After succeeding Marcus Aurelius, Commodus replaced capable administrators with flatterers and those who wouldn't challenge him. As Rome's governance deteriorated, he remained insulated from criticism, surrounded by individuals who owed their positions entirely to his favor. This pattern is not confined to history. It extends into today's boardrooms through what researchers call strategic incompetence hiring. CEOs deliberately select subordinates less capable than themselves to protect their positions. Each subordinate makes similarly self-protective hiring decisions, creating a cascade of incompetence throughout the organization's hierarchy. This forms a shield of mirrors that reflects only what the leader wishes to see while deflecting genuine criticism. The formation of these networks relies heavily on homophily, the tendency for individuals to associate with others who share similar traits or capability levels. An incompetent leader gravitates toward others who mirror their weaknesses. This creates an insulated environment where conflicting viewpoints are systematically excluded. Innovation stalls as this echo chamber reinforces poor decision-making. In these environments, truly competent individuals face a treacherous landscape. Those who demonstrate genuine expertise often find themselves marginalized or removed. Their competence represents an existential threat to the leader's carefully constructed facade. By highlighting the contrast between effective practices and the leader's inadequacies, capable team members become targets for elimination rather than promotion. What's particularly striking about incompetence networks is their remarkable stability despite poor performance. Questioning becomes discouraged, and skepticism gets branded as disloyalty. As employees become increasingly cynical about the organization's direction, emotional exhaustion follows. Research confirms that leaders perceived as unethical create work environments marked by organizational cynicism, yet the structure persists. Theranos, under Elizabeth Holmes, illustrates this dynamic perfectly. Competent scientists who questioned the company's impossible claims were systematically pushed out, while loyal supporters without relevant expertise were promoted. Similarly, Adam Neumann's WeWork maintained its fantasy valuation long after financial experts identified fundamental flaws. The incompetence network insulated him from reality until collapse became inevitable. These networks flourish particularly well in environments marked by economic anxiety. When faced with complex problems, incompetent leaders thrive by offering simple explanations and convenient scapegoats. This manipulation creates fertile ground for incompetence to spread beyond individual organizations to entire industries or political systems. Organizational psychologists note that incompetence networks function as self-sustaining organisms. The leader's weaknesses become institutionalized through policies, practices, and cultural norms that discourage excellence and reward compliance. As this culture solidifies, the organization loses its capacity for self-correction. Even obvious failures get reframed as successes or blamed on external factors, creating a reality distortion field that can persist for years or decades. The simplicity trap. Why we choose clear wrong answers. These reality distortion fields don't just persist because of organizational structures, they thrive because of a peculiar quirk in human psychology. When faced with a climate scientist who says it's complicated and a confident figure who declares it's simple, our brains overwhelmingly favor the latter, even when evidence suggests they're wrong. This preference is driven by a fundamental psychological need that shapes our political landscape, corporate hierarchies, and personal decisions. Psychologists call this phenomenon the need for cognitive closure, a powerful psychological drive that compels us to seek definitive answers and avoid ambiguity. It's a core function of how our minds process information, particularly during times of stress or uncertainty. When faced with complex problems that resist easy solutions, this need intensifies, making us vulnerable to those offering clarity over accuracy. We see this daily in political debates, where candidates who offer simple, absolute answers often gain more traction than those acknowledging nuance and complexity. Meanwhile, populist messaging offers absolute certainty, often dismissing complex issues with simple explanations that provide immediate psychological comfort. While the scientific approach requires holding multiple possibilities in mind simultaneously, a mentally taxing exercise, the populist approach offers the relief of certainty, even when contradicting overwhelming evidence. Consider how this plays out in the climate change debate. Environmental scientists typically present their findings with careful qualifications, acknowledging ranges of possibilities, discussing confidence intervals, and presenting nuanced policy recommendations. This scientifically sound approach creates cognitive discomfort, The mental effort required to process this complexity triggers uncertainty, which our brains instinctively resist. Our minds operate like consumers in a convenience culture. We gravitate toward fast, simple answers that satisfy immediately, rather than complex explanations that require mental digestion. This cognitive fast food preference feels satisfying but leaves us intellectually malnourished. This cognitive bias directly influences our leadership selection processes. A 2017 Yale experiment revealed how dramatically political beliefs affect our interpretation of complex policy problems. Participants' ability to correctly interpret data was directly influenced by whether the results aligned with their pre-existing political views. More troubling, the study suggested people often use their intelligence not to arrive at accurate conclusions, but to justify their preferred ones. The implications are profound. When selecting leaders, our brains aren't necessarily looking for those with the most accurate understanding of complex problems. Instead, we're drawn to those who offer psychological comfort through certainty, even when demonstrably false. This creates a selection bias favoring those who lack the cognitive capacity or intellectual honesty to acknowledge complexity. Our mental architecture wasn't designed for modern governance complexities. For most of human history, quick, decisive judgments were adaptive. Hesitation when facing a predator could be fatal. These same mental shortcuts become liabilities when applied to complex systems like climate policy, international relations, or pandemic response. In these domains, nuance isn't weakness, it's essential accuracy. Cognitive dissonance theory explains this further. When encountering information contradicting existing beliefs, we experience psychological discomfort. To alleviate this, our brains often adjust beliefs rather than process contradictory information. Leaders offering simplistic answers exploit this by providing narratives that minimize cognitive dissonance, even when contradicting factual reality. This preference for certainty creates perverse incentives in both politics and business. Leaders acknowledging complexity and uncertainty, hallmarks of genuine expertise, are often perceived as indecisive or weak. Those projecting unwavering confidence in simplistic solutions gain support because they shield us from the discomfort of ambiguity. The consequences extend beyond leadership selection. This psychological mechanism makes us vulnerable to conspiracy theories, which reduce complex societal problems to simple narratives with clear villains and straightforward solutions. Their appeal isn't accuracy, but their ability to transform nebulous anxiety into focused certainty. Breaking this cycle requires developing higher tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty, recognizing that in complex domains, the most accurate answer is rarely the simplest or most psychologically satisfying. It requires cultivating intellectual humility, acknowledging that on many important issues, certainty is neither possible nor desirable. The ethical handicap, morality as a competitive disadvantage. Beyond intellectual humility lies a more troubling reality, the ethical penalty. History shows us that principled individuals like Cicero ultimately lose to pragmatic operators like Caesar, not despite their integrity, but because of it. Machiavelli's most unsettling insight wasn't about intelligence itself, but about the moral limitations that often accompany it. In The Prince, he challenges traditional ethical frameworks by suggesting that moral considerations become a significant disadvantage in the pursuit of power. His argument is brutally practical. Leaders who remain bound by ethical constraints will inevitably lose to those willing to discard them when necessary. The historical contrast between Cicero and Julius Caesar illustrates this ethical handicap perfectly. Cicero, the brilliant orator and statesman, upheld republican principles and constitutional norms even as Rome's political system crumbled. Caesar recognized that the old rules no longer applied when he crossed the Rubicon, violating Roman law by bringing his army into Italy. He demonstrated the advantage of ethical flexibility. As Cicero himself lamented in a letter to Atticus, "I see no end to these evils, when victory itself will bring many calamities." His prophetic words captured the fundamental disadvantage faced by those who play by rules their opponents willingly discard. This dynamic creates Machiavelli's ethical asymmetry. Those willing to cross moral boundaries have access to strategies unavailable to the principled. The ethical leader must win while following the rules. The Machiavellian leader changes the rules to ensure victory. The outcome of this uneven contest often favors the unscrupulous. Machiavelli's view of human nature reinforces this advantage. He described people as ungrateful, fickle, liars, and deceivers, avoiders of danger, greedy for profit. From this cynical perspective, ethical behavior becomes naive in a world where others readily exploit principles as weaknesses. This explains why Machiavelli concluded it was safer for a ruler to be feared than loved, as fear provides a more reliable tool for control. Modern business ethics research confirms this pattern. Studies show that leaders with Machiavellian tendencies often experience faster career advancement compared to colleagues who prioritize ethical conduct. A 2017 study in the Journal of Business Ethics found that employees who scored higher on measures of Machiavellianism received more positive performance evaluations and were promoted more frequently, despite not showing objectively better performance. These individuals excel at impression management, manipulating others' perceptions to maximize personal power. This advantage creates what researchers call a race to the bottom, an environment where unethical behaviors become normalized and eventually transform entire organizational systems. As manipulative behaviors are rewarded with advancement, others feel pressure to adopt similar tactics or risk being left behind. The practical manifestations of this ethical handicap appear consistently in modern workplaces. Machiavellian leaders systematically employ tactics to maintain position, minimizing others' influence, strategically withholding information, and manipulating colleagues. Organizations particularly vulnerable to these dynamics include those with poorly defined performance metrics, ambiguous promotion criteria, or leadership that prioritizes short-term results over sustainable growth. Consider the case of a tech executive who maintains separate communication channels with different team members, controlling information flow while creating competing factions that ultimately strengthened his position. By the time his team recognized the manipulation, he had already secured a promotion based on their fragmented work. Identifying Machiavellian leaders becomes critical for professional survival. Look for individuals who thrive in ambiguous environments where rules aren't strictly enforced but struggle in rule-based organizations with clear accountability. Watch for those who prioritize perception over substance, treating colleagues as instruments rather than individuals with inherent value. Most tellingly, observe how they respond to ethical dilemmas. While principled leaders experience genuine tension when values conflict, Machiavellians view ethical questions purely through the lens of personal advantage. They don't struggle with moral choices because they've reduced all decisions to a single calculation. What serves my interests best? Toxic environments where mediocrity thrives. That cold calculation of self-interest doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It thrives in specific environments designed to reward it. Consider how surgeons face immediate consequences for incompetence, while corporate executives can hide behind quarterly reports and carefully crafted narratives. The difference isn't the people, it's the system. Like a stagnant swamp where harmful organisms thrive while beneficial life struggles to survive, toxic organizational environments create perfect conditions for incompetence to flourish. The uncomfortable truth about leadership is that individual psychology only tells half the story. Far more significant are the structural forces that determine whether competence rises or mediocrity flourishes. These forces create the playing field where Machiavellian tactics either succeed spectacularly or fail miserably. The first critical factor is feedback loops and accountability structures. In domains where performance feedback is immediate and consequences are unavoidable, incompetence struggles to survive. A surgeon who makes fatal errors faces swift professional consequences, but in environments where feedback is delayed, indirect, or easily manipulated, mediocrity persists indefinitely. Political systems exemplify this problem. Negative outcomes can be blamed on predecessors or external factors, while successes can be claimed regardless of who deserves credit. This absence of clear, timely consequences creates fertile ground for inadequate leadership. The design of institutions themselves determines whether incompetence will be exposed or protected. Systems with concentrated power and weak checks and balances are particularly vulnerable. The Soviet Union's collapse demonstrates how centralized decision-making with insufficient oversight accelerates institutional failure. By contrast, governance models that separate management from oversight create structural resistance to incompetent leadership. Germany's dual-board corporate system, which divides operational management from supervisory functions, exemplifies this protective design. Information asymmetry provides another powerful shield for incompetence. When results are easily measured and transparently presented, merit tends to prevail. But when goals are ambiguous and success is subjectively evaluated, style eclipses substance. Machiavelli recognized this centuries ago, noting how people judge primarily by appearances rather than deeper realities. This creates a perfect environment for mediocrity to masquerade as excellence, particularly in complex domains where few possess specialized knowledge to make informed judgments. Economic incentives form the fourth crucial structural element. Systems that prioritize short-term gains over sustainable performance create perverse rewards for superficial leadership. The 2008 financial crisis demonstrated how compensation structures that rewarded immediate profits, regardless of risk, encouraged decision-making that prioritized appearance over substance. The human cost of these toxic environments extends beyond organizational failure. Workers suffer under incompetent leadership, often experiencing stress, disillusionment, and career stagnation. The Boeing 737 MAX crisis tragically illustrates this connection. Pressure to meet financial targets allegedly contributed to engineering decisions that ultimately cost 30 foes. Moving from industrial to political spheres, Vladimir Putin has masterfully manipulated Russia's information environment and accountability structures despite questionable governance outcomes. By controlling media narratives, exploiting patriotic sentiment, and eliminating opposition, he's engineered an environment where competence matters less than loyalty and perception management. Similarly, Elizabeth Holmes built Theranos into a $9 billion company through strategic deception rather than functional technology. She exploited Silicon Valley's tendency to valorize bold claims and revolutionary rhetoric over demonstrated results. Both cases illustrate how environmental manipulation enables incompetent leadership to flourish. These environments become self-reinforcing once established. They select for the wrong types of leaders while systematically excluding more competent alternatives. Interestingly, Machiavellian leaders perform best in ambiguous environments, particularly those emphasizing creativity or innovation, where uncertainty about what constitutes success exists naturally. Conversely, they struggle in rule-based organizations with clear procedures, as their tendency to ignore established protocols becomes more apparent and problematic, breaking the cycle from manipulation to merit. The structures that enable incompetent leadership weren't created by accident. They were designed, which means they can be redesigned. What's truly remarkable is that dismantling these systems doesn't require genius or revolution, just strategic changes to the environments we create and the individual choices we make. This is where Machiavelli's observations become a diagnosis and potential prescription. Are you ready to reclaim power from manipulative leaders? Can we break free from systems that reward style over substance? Breaking the cycle of incompetence requires action at both individual and collective levels. At the personal level, we must cultivate awareness, recognizing psychological biases that make us vulnerable to charismatic but hollow leadership, develop intellectual humility, acknowledging the limits of our knowledge while remaining open to evidence-based ideas. Build media literacy, distinguishing substance from spectacle by questioning both what information is presented and how it's framed. Practice philosophical reflection, stepping back to examine deeper principles guiding decision-making. When we understand that competence includes recognizing our limitations, we're less likely to be swayed by those who display none. These skills form a cognitive immune system that protects against manipulation without diminishing our confidence. At the collective level, organizations, robust accountability mechanisms, providing honest feedback regardless of a leader's charm, cognitive diversity that challenges assumptions and uncovers pitfalls before it's too late. Transparency rules making it harder for leaders to operate without scrutiny. Educational priorities emphasizing critical thinking over technical skills alone. Well-designed feedback systems that measure genuine competence rather than confidence. Consider how Satya Nadella transformed Microsoft after taking over in 2000. By implementing several of these strategies, particularly cognitive diversity, transparent accountability, and feedback systems tied to meaningful outcomes, he shifted the company from a stagnating giant to an innovation leader. Microsoft's market value tripled within 5 years because the organization began rewarding substance over style. Organizations that successfully transform typically implement these strategies in combination. They create environments where merit is transparently measured, diverse perspectives are valued, and accountability systems operate independently of personal relationships. The results show in improved decision-making, greater innovation, and sustainable success. What makes these approaches particularly encouraging is their accessibility. Small, strategic changes can shift incentives enough to begin reversing dysfunctional patterns. A simple rule requiring written dissenting opinions for major decisions can dramatically improve outcomes, normalizing constructive disagreement. These strategies work by targeting the environmental conditions that allow incompetence to flourish. By changing selection pressures within organizations and societies, we gradually shift from systems that reward charismatic incompetence to ones that recognize genuine capability. The implications extend beyond organizational performance to societal health. When competence trumps confidence in leadership structures, resources flow towards solving real problems rather than manufacturing the appearance of solutions. This represents pragmatism in its purest form. The responsibility falls on each of us to implement these approaches where we have influence, whether as voters, employees, managers, or community members. We all participate in creating environments that either enable or disable incompetent leadership. Our choices, which behaviors we reward, which standards we enforce, which information we consume, collectively shape the leadership selection systems around us. By making these changes, we don't just improve our organizations, we reclaim agency in a world that often seems designed to surrender it to the loudest, most confident voices, regardless of their competence. The tools for transformation are already in our hands. Machiavelli's observations on power dynamics continue to resonate centuries later, revealing the persistent gap between power and competence in our institutions. Throughout history, we've seen how perception management and strategic manipulation often prevail over genuine merit. Understanding these mechanisms offers a path forward. By recognizing the forces that enable incompetent leaders to rise, we can design better systems prioritizing capability, ethical behavior, and transparency. The challenge now falls to each of us. Will you challenge the status quo and demand leadership that truly delivers? Share your experiences with Power Dynamics in the comments below.